don't think I even need to say how big of a hit the Game Boy line of systems were. I mean, just look at the sales numbers. The Game Boy lineage is such a big deal, it spoke for itself. In fact, when looking back on Nintendo's history with video games, compared to their home consoles, Nintendo had way more success with their portables. And that is just so bizarre, man.
It was the Game & Watch that got Nintendo's foot in the door. Then, in 1981, came Donkey Kong in arcades, which to say it went better than their prior arcade games would be a massive understatement. Then came the Nintendo Famicom in 1983 in Japan, which became the NES in 1985 everywhere else. Then the original Nintendo Game Boy in 1989, which despite having 4 shades of puke-colored green, was a massive success. So much so that it outlasted the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64 before being discontinued in 2003 over 14 years later. What? And of course, we also got upgrades and successors to the Battery Hog. First, the Game Boy Pocket, a slimmed down version. Why is this a pattern with consoles? I don't get it. Then the Japan exclusive Game Boy Light, which added a lit up screen. Then the Game Boy Color in 1998, around the time Pokemon came out worldwide, which added color to the screen and the games, and had its own exclusive titles. Then the Game Boy Advance in March 2001, which was basically a 32-bit portable Super Nintendo, which explains why so many SNES ports were made for it. But a few years later, we'd get an upgrade in the Advance SP in February 2003, which was the first modern Nintendo handheld with a clamshell design, reminiscent of the clamshell Game & Watch systems. And it had a frontlit and backlit screen, along with a chargeable battery. It was truly peak Game Boy, especially since GBC and GBA were all backwards compatible with the original Game Boy games, with GBA also being backwards compatible with Game Boy Color games. The only one that wasn't was unfortunately the last system to bear the Game Boy title, the Game Boy Micro in late 2005. It was basically a tiny Game Boy Advance minus the backwards compatibility, and it came with a Famicom controller variant in Japan, which I want. However, by this time the DS had already been released and was gaining popularity, so this would be the last swan song of the Game Boy family of systems.
It's still very surprising how much love Nintendo put into this line of systems for those 15 years. And then of course we got ways to play these games on our home consoles, starting on the Super Nintendo with the Super Game Boy.
This is also something I don't need to say how successful it was. I mean, there was even a second version with link cable support exclusive in Japan, along with an exclusive controller for the Super Game Boy that was made by Hori. We'll get back to them later. However, aside from technically the Game Boy Transfer Pack, the Nintendo 64 didn't have any official ways to play Game Boy games on it. There was the Wide Boy, which was made by Intelligent Systems, who created Paper Mario and Fire Emblem, which was originally made for Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but later was redone to support Game Boy Advance. But it was only made for testing and getting high quality press images. Plus by this point, the N64 was already about to ride off into the sunset. It would take until 2003 before we got a new way to play Game Boy games on our home consoles again, with the Game Boy Player.
The Game Boy Player was an add-on for the Nintendo GameCube, which wasn't one of Nintendo's best performing systems in terms of sales. But Nintendo was really pushing during this era, even if Sony and Microsoft were beating them. And I would know. I was curious about the GameCube, but my family was PS2. And then we'd move on to the Xbox 360. I never owned a GameCube until a few years ago when I found one in the attic of my aunt's house here. It belonged to my cousin along with a Platinum PS2 Slim, but both have since become mine. The GameCube itself is missing an eject button, but it still works pretty good. And it still had the Game Boy Player attachment on it. And when I was looking through my other cousin's closet in the room across from here, she had left a lot of her N64 stuff, along with the aforementioned Nintendo 64 Transfer Pack, as well as the much-needed boot disc for the Game Boy Player.
Oh man, this thing goes for pretty high prices nowadays on the aftermarket, especially on eBay. I was lucky to have found this in her closet with all her her N64 stuff, including the N64 transfer pack. There was 2 of them, if you can believe it. So Liz, if you're watching this, thanks for saving my aunt from getting her wallet burned up.
It's me. If you're a long-time subscriber of this channel, you know that this review you're watching right now is one I've been planning for a long while. Since the very start of this channel, actually. There was just a few things I was missing before getting to this. One, the GameCube link cable adapter. It was a cable that allowed you to use your Game Boy Advance or Game Boy Advance SP as a controller for certain games that allowed it, like Legend of Zelda 4 Swords or Pac-Man Versus, or Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. And for games like Rayman 3 and Crash Rapid Vortex, you'd get special minigames you could play. But you cannot use the link cable itself for navigating the GameCube menu if you're going to use the Game Boy Player right away. There was one accessory I could not get for this review, and that was the fabled Hori digital GameCube controller. Super Nintendo style controller with the button layout, with the front face button layout and the Z button of the GameCube, just adding a select button. It was sold in America, but nobody knows when and for how long. Nowadays, importing them from Japan can be a rare cost a lot. So I am thankful that Old School has recently put out their own alternative to that controller, so maybe the prices can go down. But without any further ado, we got the add-on, we got some games, and we got enough accessories. So let's have some fun and explore this system.
The system itself is mainly built off of Game Boy Advance hardware, meaning what you can do with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on the system applies here. Using L and R will stretch the image, and the various button color combos will apply here too. Pressing the Z button on the controller will open up a menu similar to the Super Game Boy. Here you can change the border, change the screen size, change the resolution from sharp, standard, or soft. Set a timer in case you got something in the oven or want to limit your playtime. Change the audio settings. Change what you want to use on your main GameCube controller for select. And change game packs out. So you could go from Pac-Man on Game Boy to Pac-Man Collection whenever you want. Okay, maybe that was a bad example.
While all of this is great, there are downsides to this system. One of these is that Super Game Boy Advance games won't have their Super Game Boy enhancements. No special borders, no sound effects, it's exclusive to the Super Game Boy versions, and no special color palettes. Though with the Pokemon games, I don't think that'll be much of a problem. Also, while you can use your GBA and GBA SP as controllers, don't expect to be able to use the Game Boy Color or original Game Boy, though I think that's pretty obvious. Games with built-in rumble that require batteries won't let you feel the rumble through your controller like traditional games. Instead, the console will rattle and shake from the rumble. And also, full motion control games like WarioWare Twisted, Yoshi Topsy-Turvy, and Kirby Tilted Tumble, yeah, you're gonna have to be using the entire console when playing them. I am dead serious. I am not joking. But overall, it'll work with every last game that was built for the Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. Even if they're locked down by what region they're released in, like region exclusive ones from Europe or Japan. This was something that was built for every last game in the Game Boy library in mind.
But this would be the last time we saw Nintendo make add-ons that offered backwards compatibility to this scale ever. The Nintendo Wii had backwards compatibility with GameCube titles and was able to use the controllers and memory cards, but you couldn't use the Game Boy Player with it as far as I know. All you can do is put the boot disc in it and use the link adapter or the Hori digital controller. The Wii U was planned to have some kind of adapter for DS and supposedly 3DS games as far as I know, but that was scrapped. The DSi had a digital store like the Wii, but you couldn't get virtual console games scale like the Wii Shop. Then came the 3DS, which would offer NES, Game Gear, Game Boy, and Game Boy Color titles, Super Game Boy being forgotten again, gosh dang it, and Super Nintendo for new 3DS systems. Meanwhile, GBA and oddly enough Nintendo DS games were offered alongside NES, Super Nintendo, N64, and Wii games on the Wii U Z Shop. What kind of timeline are we living in where this happens? Nowadays, Nintendo's only idea of offering its legacy content is with the Nintendo Switch Online membership and the expansion pack upgrade. NES, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy Color games being available in the base membership. Meanwhile, N64, Game Boy Advance, and Sega Genesis titles through the expansion pack upgrade are available. Using the NES Joy-Cons with Game Boy titles being the closest we might get for a while of having special Game Boy controllers. Not that I could test it because I do not have those Joy-Cons. Why did God curse me with being poor? But just be warned that the Game Boy collections are rarely barren right now. It's not a lot of titles on them. Though Metroid Fusion was recently added to the GBA collection, so fingers crossed that there'll be more games to come in the future. Don't let us down, Nintendo. You're already on thin ice.
However, if you ask me, the Game Boy player is worth it for what you got to have. If you can hunt down the Game Boy player, a GameCube, and some Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games, then yeah, I say go look for it. You aren't going to be disappointed with what you got, and if you can get the Link adapter and a Game Boy Advance to use it with, that's even better. Before we end this video, I should mention some things. One, there are ways to use your Game Boy player without the Game Boy player boot disc. I recommend looking up some videos here on YouTube about that. And I should mention the Game Boy Advance video series, because if I don't, I know there's going to be lots of comments that will mention it. The Game Boy Advance video series was a series by Nintendo featuring the likes of Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, Disney Channel, and even DreamWorks, oddly enough. These usually contain a couple of episodes of cartoons, or in some cases, with the DreamWorks ones, full movies. However, you will not be able to play them on your Game Boy player. This kind of locking out was done so that game companies and the video distributors won't have to worry about these episodes and movies getting pirated. Though if you ask me, I don't know why we'd want to pirate something that looks like it was made for a Game Boy Advance screen when you can just easily watch it on Paramount Plus or Netflix. But that does it for me. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to leave a like if you did, and comment down below what you thought of this video and if you were patient enough for this. Also, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload new videos. And share this video around with people you know so I can get some organic boost compared to algorithmic one. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.
Hey guys, Gavin Lee Varner here. Editor Varner here, delivering an end of video message. Because, guys, this video is finally out there. I know there are a good chunk of you who probably have waiting this for a long time, and again, like I said at the very start of this video, with that Adult Swim-like bump, I cannot thank you enough for your continued patience. I know this video was supposed to come out last month, but personal stuff got in the way and I got a bit lazy, I will admit. But rest assured, from here on out, I'm going to be doing my best to keep to the schedule. Hopefully, if all goes well with exporting, as of right now while recording, you will see this video uploaded sometime tonight. Anyways, I forgot to mention this at the end, but make sure you go follow me on DeviantArt, Twitter, and on Itaku. The links to those accounts will be in the description down below. And yeah, expect Blue and Friends Plush Episode 4 sometime soon, along with more Toons Play and Toontown News Network. And that about does it for me. I'll see you guys later, and enjoy the rest of May. I got some recording to do. Bye bye!